How do you find the very best coffee in town? Well, we'll tell you this week on Motoring 98.
TSN's Motoring 98 is brought to you by Quaker State. The big Q stands for quality, always has, always will, and Midas for new, longer-lasting, performance friction carbon metallic brake pads.
Well, this week, ladies and gentlemen, I've decided to come out of the closet. I am a lover of maps, road maps. I love folding them and touching them and reading them. And you know, every now and then they're quite useful in getting you from point A to point B. But I have some unfortunate news for map lovers. I'll tell you more about that later on. But first, as you know, we are celebrating 10 years on TSN, the Sports Network, and we will continue to relive some memories on Motoring 98. We're going to begin this week with one of our most requested features. And as you're about to see, this one is a real sob story. Auto journalists were in for a real treat recently at the Atlanta Motor Speedway. Not only was former Saab rally great Eric Carlson in town, but he also brought along some very talented drivers. The Saab performance team is comprised of men who work in the technical division of Saab in Sweden. This was their first opportunity in North America to demonstrate that when driver and machine become one, the results can be phenomenal.
This team started up at 87 for a 50 years anniversary, and we're using this 900 turbo 3-door sedan, and that's actually quite standard. We have done nothing but increase the tire pressure. That's all we do.
Speaking of tires, keep your eye on the left front. This exercise demonstrated the Saab's ability to react in an emergency situation with little or no driver input. Then it was time for the snake, led by team leader Bank Dahl.
If you start up with the snake, that we call it, I think it's showing how smooth you can go and narrow to the other car, you know, and still have full control.
You're the leader, all the pressure's on you?
Yeah, all the pressure is on me, you can say that, yeah. But that's, I don't know if it's easier to be in the front or in the back, you know, they have to increase the speed a little bit more and when you do this turning and so on. But in front we have to keep the speed down, to keep them steady back there.
The speed increases for the next demonstration called the zigzag, which would leave no room for error.
That's a little bit tricky one, you know, because you can't be on top of each other, because then you smash the rear end of the other car. And after that we do this meeting, and that's mostly timing.
Okay, as we clear the track.
There are people called stunt drivers, but do you consider yourself stunt drivers or?
No, we are not stunt drivers. We are common guys who have done a lot of driving. I think we are quite experienced driver, all of us, because we have done a lot of rally driving back home in Sweden and other countries in Europe. I think we have been rally driving for 10, 15 years, all of us. So we have the experience to drive a car on slippery roads, and that we use on the asphalt.
The team effort, a chemistry, how important is that among the team?
I think it's quite important, otherwise it won't work. Everyone has to be on top of everything, you know. And we all love to drive cars, and that's the main thing, I think.
Have combined experience and size.
Fuel. Hey? Yeah. Thanks for oh, yeah.
This week we take a look at Intrigue. Now you'll notice I didn't call it the Oldsmobile Intrigue, and for that there is good reason. During the clinicking process, without any name on it at all, it fared very well. When they added Oldsmobile to the car, it dropped by a full 50%. Now interestingly, Oldsmobile is written on this car in two spots. One is the radio, the other one, we have a good look for it. Beneath the hood you'll find GM's highly respected 3.8-litre 3800 Series 2 V6. With 195 horsepower and 225 pounds-feet of torque on tap, there is no shortage of pulling power. The throttle response is quick all the way from idle to redline, and if you goose the gas to pass, the pickup is all it should be. We should mention that there will be a V6 version of Cadillac's OnStar available sometime soon. This engine has been dubbed the Short Star and will bring 215 horse to the party. Intrigue features traction control, and in weather like this it's a godsend. Perhaps the only weird thing is that the noise is really less than flattering. Intrigue's platform is world-class in its stiffness, and so the European-inspired suspension has a terrific base from which to work. The design incorporates struts at each corner and roll bars at both ends. Where it differs is in the damping characteristics. The special four-phase deflected disc design controls body motion very well. Intrigue remains flat in corners and does not display the usual fore-aft pitching so common in lesser designs. About the only dynamic trait I don't like about this Intrigue has to do with the steering. Now while the on-centre feel is all it should be and the turn-ins are crisp and very controllable, what happens is as you get off-centre, the steering goes a little mushy. Overly critical may be, but if they could cure this, the dynamics of this car are superb. The trunk on the Intrigue has been well thought through. It's large, as in 462 litres. You get a cargo net. But what I do like, cantilever style hinges. It gets the deck lid up and out of the way, and it also does away with the old hockey style hinges that used to crush whatever you placed in the corner. Lastly, to fold down either one of the split folding rear seats, you simply pull on these tags. Been very nicely thought through. One of the few options offered on the Intrigue is the Autobahn package. Now this thing brings two things to the party: bigger brakes and speed-rated tyres. Now the speed-rated tyres bring a stiffer sidewall, which gives you a harshness in the ride quality that's completely out of character with the rest of the car. I wish GM would offer the big brakes as a standalone option and leave the tyres the way they are. One of the things I like about the rear environment of the Intrigue is this very simple black plastic clip. When you buckle a youngster in, it keeps the webbing off their face and neck. Now obviously they wear their seatbelt, they're going to be a lot safer. And as I'm apt to say, it's the small things that make the big difference. Inside, all of the controls have a uniform tactile feel, one that imparts a feeling of quality to everything you touch. All of that said, you know, the single biggest improvement is the demise of the Smart Stalk. It plays far too many functions on a single lever. Now what they've got, one on either side of the column, and the cruise control is now mounted on the steering wheel. And it's about time too. Well, that does it for another edition of Test Drive. You know, the Intrigue is perhaps the finest example of General Motors engineering at its very best. What I find really funny, however, is despite the lengths they've gone to hide this vehicle's heritage, if you want to buy one, you've got to go to none other than an Oldsmobile dealership. Well, it's time to wrap up our long-term Elantra. Now, whenever we needed to take a long trip, this was the vehicle of choice, primarily because of the economies of scale. First of all, it's affordable to buy. Second of all, it's affordable to service. We got ding less than 30 bucks for the 6,000k service. It's also very economical to operate, as in 36 miles per gallon overall average throughout the length of the test. Now that, when you consider the perky performance and interior room, is very difficult to beat. It's going to be sad to say goodbye.
Turn right on Joe McGuire Boulevard.
A few years ago, we were told that navigation systems were the future. Even rental companies began using them, even though they were just another distraction for the driver. Well, General Motors thinks it has the answer to the smart car. It's called the OnStar Information and Communication System.
Actually, there is a satellite element to it. We do use the Global Positioning System, or GPS, to provide the vehicle's location, just its latitude and longitude, and that's it. Once we've got that information in the vehicle, when we make a call to the OnStar Center, that information, plus a little bit of information about the vehicle, goes out on the voice call. And when the service advisor picks up the call, they immediately know from the database on the customer who the customer is, what they're driving, and where they are. At the OnStar Service Center, we've gone to great lengths to obtain digital maps of all of Canada and the United States.
OnStar Center, this is Mandy Friedenberg. How may I help you?
Hi Mandy, it's John Wood from GM of Canada calling.
How are you doing today, sir?
Oh, not too bad.
What can I do for you this morning?
Well, perhaps you can tell us where you are.
I'm in Troy, Michigan. It's a suburb of Detroit.
Okay. And where would you find us today?
Looks like I have you at 1908 Colonel Sam Drive in Oshawa, Ontario, Canada.
Could you unlock our door for us?
Sure, I'll send a command to unlock the driver's door, and we'll be off the line here for just one moment, okay?
Thank you. And while we're waiting for this, she is sending a data signal back over the cellular telephone to the car, and the OnStar hardware, right there, will unlock the door. And there we are. Let's just pretend, for example, I went down to a car show or was out shopping for Christmas and I forgot where I parked my car.
And we can send a command to honk the horn and flash the lights for you so that you can find your car. Okay, I can do that for you, and I will put this on a driver's door override. So when you want it to stop, all you need to do is open and close the driver's door, okay?
Good idea. I don't want anybody towing me away.
Okay, we'll be off the line here for just one moment.
Thanks. There are cases, though, where the car itself is going to act on your behalf when you can't call. If you're in an accident, heaven forbid, and the airbag goes off, the electronics in the vehicle will initiate a call automatically to the OnStar Center. And at that time, we'll have several things happen. One, the fact that the airbag went off. Two, the vehicle identification. Three, through the GPS system, your actual location. Now, if the customer cannot answer the call because they may be incapacitated, immediately the OnStar Center will contact emergency services and send them right to that vehicle location. And it's accurate to within 100 meters, so that's pretty bang on. One of the things that people do tend to confuse with OnStar, they think it's satellite communications. It is not. Satellites provide the location information, the latitude and longitude, that's it. The communications channel is a cellular telephone. And the cellular telephone is the heart and soul of the OnStar hardware. Without the phone, the system simply doesn't work.
Your Midas tip of the week concerns emergency brake systems. The cables that actuate the emergency brake on your car live in a very harsh environment underneath the car. They get pelted with a lot of road spray and dirt from the tires, and they can quickly seize up if they're not used on a regular basis. And that's the problem with a lot of people's cars. They just don't use them often enough or at all. You can see that when I apply the emergency brake on this rear wheel, the wheel locks quickly and releases as it should. Now, in order to test the emergency brake function on your car, suggest that you find a secluded parking lot with a little bit of a gradient. Apply the emergency brake and make sure that it completely stops and holds the car on that grade. Then release it and make sure that the car rolls away freely. If it won't apply or it won't release properly, you've got a serious problem with the emergency brake cables. You need to fix that as soon as possible. That's your Midas tip of the week.
A portion of Motoring 98 is brought to you by the Solder Seal Gunk family of automotive products, makers of Puncture Seal Gold and Liquid Wrench.
It's a 1975 Bricklin, manufactured in New Brunswick. It's a Canadian-made car. Features of it are, it's basically was built as a safety vehicle with many items built into it. Roll cage in the through the top of the car, and you're actually sitting down between the framework of the car. But the actual car itself is fiberglass with a gel coat plastic on top of the fiberglass, and the color is actually into the gel coat, which is about a 1/16 of an inch thick. So when you get door chips and things like that on the car, they're easy to sand out and rebuff up with no problem whatsoever. Originally, there was less than 2,900 cars made to a production time of about 18 months. It's a stress reliever from whatever you're doing. When you get home, you got something else to holler and swear at and kick. My wife doesn't like the idea that her car sits in the snow. Well, this one sits in the garage all winter long.
Well, earlier we saw the General Motors OnStar system on board the Cadillac Seville. Well, it will be available on a wide range of GM products, including minivans like our long-term Pontiac Transport. And are you ready for this? The OnStar will also be available on all full-size pickup trucks. Well, we know who will be first in line to pick one up. That, of course, is Bill Gardner. Right, Bill?
Brad, as remarkable as the OnStar system's capabilities are, and I don't doubt they're great for some people, it's not my cup of tea, I'll tell you. There's only one aspect of that OnStar that appeals to me, and that's the fact that they can locate a vehicle if it gets stolen, apparently anywhere in the world within something like 100 meters. And that's pretty neat to me. But if I lose my car in a parking lot, I wouldn't even admit to that operator on the other end of the phone line that I'd done it, let alone allow him to start flashing the lights and beeping the horn to draw attention to myself. No thanks. Anyhow, I want to talk about something that's a little more basic in terms of automotive parts, and that's the heater core. Now, when you come out in the parking lot and your car's covered in this kind of soupy mess, you need a good heater core to defrost the windows and heat up the interior. I don't think anybody would argue about that. Now, we've got a couple of heater cores here for samples. This is an older style heater core. There's still a lot of cars on the road today that use this kind of a core. It's all metallic. This is a pretty heavy little unit. You can see the solder lines around here. This tank is soldered to the core. You can see the solder along here. Another line of solder here where this tank is attached to the core. Now, these cores, typically when they leaked, it was usually a pretty slow leak. These things were a little bit apt to plugging up if your cooling system wasn't flushed regularly. And of course, when they plugged up, this wouldn't properly exchange heat into the interior of the car. No matter how good a thermostat you had, you'd only get lukewarm air out of them. Now, on newer cars, you've got an aluminum core like this and plastic tanks. There's no solder used to hold this core together. You can see these little claws here that are crimped over to hold this one together. Plastic tank. Now, these things exchange heat extremely well. I don't think I can't remember the last time I've seen one of these clog up and fail to exchange heat. But what does happen to them is the plastic tanks and the plastic fittings can split. You can see this one right here has got a pretty substantial crack in it. When that happens, you're in big trouble. Now, if you have trouble with a heater core failing, in all likelihood, the problem's going to show up inside the car. In most cases, the heater core is located behind the dash, somewhere in the middle or slightly to the right of center of the car. On this Grand Am, it has a core exactly like this one right here. Sits on a 45-degree angle on this particular car with the heater fittings projecting out through the firewall. From under the hood of the car, you're only going to see a little bit of the nipple right there where the heater hose is attached to it. Now, remember, the hot coolant comes from the engine, circulates through the heater core, and then the fan inside the car blows air through this and defrosts your windows and heats the interior of the car. Now, when these things fail, if it's located inside the car, like the majority of cars, and like this Grand Am, you're likely to have the leakage showing up on the floor of the car and the passenger side, or some white steam or smoke coming out of the vents. Now, on this Grand Am, the failure was so bad that it's put a puddle of coolant that's the entire size of the floor well on the passenger side, and it's probably about 1/4 of an inch deep in there. Now, this is a fairly significant operation in many of today's cars, 2.5 or 3 hours labor, sometimes even more, to replace these heater cores because of all the other accessories that can be in the way and the space constraints of many of today's cars. It's not the average thing that a do-it-yourselfer could attempt. And if it's one of these aluminum and plastic heater cores like this, it's not something you can ignore for very long because the leak is usually very major. So if you detect it, get that thing over, get it checked and replaced as soon as possible. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 98.
I'm Jim Kenzie, and I don't fit very well on this car seat, but your kid should. That's next on Kenzie's Corner.
Kenzie's Corner with Jim Kenzie.
I don't know about the province that you live in, but in Ontario, the law is clear. If you have a kid in a car, he or she must be strapped into a car seat. Now, there are various regulations about height and weight and age, but seriously, folks, do we need the government to tell us how old our kids have to be before we buckle them up? Let's be serious. Let's get these kids buckled up. And yet, every day I see mom and pop driving down the street. They've got their seat belts on, but Junior's standing in the back seat. Standing on the back seat. One quick stop and he's a hood ornament on that Mack truck that just went past us. The ones I really like, though, are the ones that put Junior on their lap. And I'm not just talking the passenger's lap here. I saw one yo-yo driving down University Avenue in downtown Toronto with his kid on his lap while he was steering the car. How do these people find the washroom in the morning? Now, some of you are saying out there, but my little Johnny's too active. He won't sit still in the car seat. Well, listen, I've got 4 kids, aged 2 through 12, and I'll stack them up against anybody's when it comes to being active. They've learned from day one, and I mean coming home from the hospital, the car doesn't move until the seatbelts are done up. So remember, folks, this is the future generation of our country we're talking about here. Let's give them a chance. This is Jim Kenzie for Motoring 90.
Well, as we saw earlier, General Motors' new OnStar system can be a real lifesaver in an emergency situation. Well, guess what? Yours truly and Dan the cameraman have, at this moment, a serious emergency situation. Hopefully they can help us out. Mandy, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
All right, well, you're in Troy, Michigan, and I'm in Oshawa, Ontario, but we have an emergency. Hopefully you can help us out. Can you tell us where we can find a good pizza?
Sure, my database is searching for a pizza place right now.
All right, maybe we'll get lucky on this one. That's it for now. We'll see you next week for more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
Okay, Mr. Diamond, I did find you a great pizza place.
Thank you very much. Emergency is over.
Just keep driving north on Town Line Road and you get up to home.
Part of our purpose that we want to have is to offer some kind of the opportunity to consumer to realize that he has an option to a failed engine. The product is just as good and maybe even better than the original.
TSN's Motoring 98 has been brought to you by Quaker State. The big Q stands for quality, always has, always will, and Midas for new, longer-lasting performance friction carbon metallic brake pads.